to this Tuesday morning, August the 6th, Development and Planning Services Committee meeting. We have an agenda in front of us. Are there any additions to the agenda from the staff?
None from staff, Your Worship.
Thank you. Council, are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to disclosure of interest. Councillor, are there any items of conflict of interest for you? Okay, seeing none, we'll move right into reports. 5.1, which is Development Variance Application number VP 499. We have a proposed motion on the floor. Could I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Eliason, thank you. Seconder? I will second that motion. I'll pass it over to Director of Development Services for a description of the report.
Thanks, Your Worship. This is a development variance permit application for 2 properties in the industrial park located at 5731 Auto Road and 5590 46th Avenue Southeast. The 2 businesses on the properties are T1 Enterprises and Dynoflex Holdings Incorporated. And this proposal, at least partial proposal, came to council or came to the planning committee back in May, and it was for 1 property, and that was for T1 Enterprises, represented by Tom Bowman, who's here in the audience. And Mr. Bowman asked to delay that application because Dynoflex Holdings was also interested in applying for fire hydrant variance as well. Excuse me. And because one of the fire hydrants involved applies to both properties, both companies decided to make 1 application for 2 properties. So now it's in front of the planning committee for 2 properties. And probably the best map to look at in your package to describe what's going on is on this page here. Can't see the number up here, but it's the map with it showing existing fire hydrants and required fire hydrants. And the subdivision and servicing bylaw requires spacing of 90 meters between fire hydrants. And so the existing fire hydrants along 48th Avenue and Auto Road were likely installed by the city well over 20 years ago, probably over 30 years ago, when these roads were built by the city. And the industrial standard applies to properties in the industrial park. The industrial road standard is, I guess you could say, has the least requirements for upgrades of all the standards we have. So with these building permit applications, the subdivision and servicing bylaw was triggered, and the only requirements were the installation of a fire hydrant here on 48th Avenue for Dynoflex, and here on the south side of Auto Road for both properties. The development on T1 Enterprises is a coverall building. It might be called something slightly different, but it's a fabric building, and it's about 23,000 square feet. And the building permit has been issued, and the owner, Tom, Mr. Bowman, bonded for the fire hydrant here. And because Dynoflex also had a building permit with a construction value much greater than T1 Enterprises, they bonded for both fire hydrants. So the city has the bonding for the fire hydrants, and the variance is essentially, if approved, a request to have that bonding returned.
Great, thank you very much. Is there any other information you want to share at this time?
I don't think Dynoflex is here, but they were well aware of the meeting today. Okay,
thank you very much. Mr. Bowman, good morning. Thank you for coming to see us. We do have your letter. Would you like to come and speak to us further? Please come forward to the mic.
Okay. Just to make a correction with Kevin there, my building is not 23,000 square feet, it's 2,300.
Sorry.
And, yeah, my shop has been there for 42 years, well before any fire hydrants were installed. So the city chose to put the fire hydrant close to my shop, I am assuming. With the fire department does not have any concerns with safety, I'm assuming, if they have no concerns. I'm huge on safety. My company, we have a perfect safety record. And I just, you know, these fire hydrants are $33,000. And myself, and I have one employee, I mean, that's huge amount of money for me. And yeah, I mean, if it didn't cost that much money, I would probably be okay with it. But, yeah, that's kind of where it's at.
Okay, understood. I'll just see if councillors have any questions for you.
Okay.
Council, do you have any questions for Mr. Bowman? Okay, I just want to make sure I have the cost of the fire hydrant. So my understanding is each fire hydrant's worth about $16,500. Is that right?
That's right. And there's two of them that have to go in. So.
Right. So are you're responsible for just the one on the main road? Is that right?
Yeah, we're gonna share the cost, Dynaflex and myself, on one hydrant.
Okay, so it would cost you about $8,000 away if there's no variance.
I believe it's $8,200. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is a lot of money considering the fire hydrant is actually further from my building than the existing one.
Understand.
So.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from council? Okay, thank you very much, and we'll call you back if we have some. Councillors, I'll open it up. I'll just see, is there any, Dynaflex is not here this morning. Okay. Councillors, I'll open it up to you for discussion or for questions of staff. Councillor Cannon.
Thank you. So the motion that we have on the table right now is to support, waive the requirement to install fire hydrants. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. For myself, I wasn't here at the council meeting when we had the other variants down the way that council supported. I guess for me to understand, our fire chief is fine with the existing fire hydrants. That to me means a lot, that he's fine with the existing fire hydrants. And just so that I could understand the insurance part of it a little better, could staff explain that to me? Is that the city that the underwriters, if we don't have them spaced this way, our insurance costs are going to go up? Could you just explain that to me?
Sure, I'll probably refer that to the acting director of engineering and public works.
Through your worship, yeah, the Fire Underwriter Survey is a national body of firefighters and experts who set the standards across Canada as far as what's considered reasonable and safe. So they set the standard at 90 meters in industrial and high density developments. We are then compared to that standard for our insurance ratings. As far as how that works, I believe that they compare it, they give us a ranking, and then that helps insurance companies give us our value, but I'm actually unsure exactly how that last step works. Just that they come in and compare us to that national standard.
And further to that, the flows of the existing fire hydrants are checked regularly, correct?
Through your worship, no, we do not do flow tests on our hydrants regularly. We do maintenance on them, so we do annual maintenance where we go around, turn the valves and make sure the valves are working, but we don't do actual flow tests.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cannon. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I wasn't involved in the previous discussion because I declared a conflict as the applicant was a client, so I haven't been involved in one of these recent applications for a variance. I guess I would ask staff if it's possible to ensure that the fire chief is here at the council meeting, because I believe it's the fire department or the fire chief that works with the fire underwriters. So I'm struggling with the difference between the two departments. Fire department, who I believe, if I'm correct, works with fire underwriters and works on that on a regular basis, is saying no problem. And engineering staff is saying they're concerned about the fire underwriters and the possibility of having a downgrade or a higher cost for insurance for people. So I would ask that the fire chief be at the council meeting. To me, when the fire chief is saying there's no issue and these hydrants are sufficient that are there, and there's 4 of them in the area, I struggle with forcing people to spend this money. But we have rules and we have guidelines, and this is truly a variance, and I'd sure like to hear directly from the fire chief on the issue. Is it the fire department, through you to staff, is it the fire department that works with the fire underwriters and ensures we have the high standard and rating that we get?
I'll pass that to the Chief Administrative Officer.
Yes, they certainly do.
Okay. Thank you. As I said, if somebody could be here to represent the fire department at the council meeting, that would be helpful for me.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn, and we'll make sure that that is the case. So just so Mr. Bowman understands the process, what will happen is the Development Planning Committee here, regardless of what they decide, this will pass forward to the council meeting on August the 12th, and we'll ensure that the fire department is represented at that meeting so that we have that piece of information. Councillor Flynn, do you have any other questions or comments at this time? Okay. Any other questions from council? All right, I have just a couple of queries, and again, perhaps the fire chief may be the better one to answer it. I was looking at the engineering department report, which is in Appendix 9, and trying to understand the SDSB's rules. The third paragraph down on the first page says the SDSB states that fire hydrant spacing shall be approximately and in all cases shall not exceed 150 meters in low density residential zones and 90 meters in medium and high density. And then on page 19, in the bold print, second paragraph says the maximum recommended spaces of hydrants in commercial, industrial, institutional, multifamily, residential areas is 90 meters. And so I'd like to know from the fire chief, it says recommended and it says approximately. How are those suggestions? Are those hard and fast rules? How is that written up in regulations? Perhaps the Director of Engineering and Public Works knows the answer to that. If not, I could wait.
Through your worship, yeah. So that wording is directly out of the fire underwriters survey. So that's the national recommendations across Canada. It is up to the municipalities to set their standards through their bylaws. So ultimately, through council's decision, you could set the spacing to whatever you wanted. Right now, you'll notice that there is a discrepancy between what the fire underwriter survey says for residential spacing and what our bylaw says. So their recommended spacing's the 180 meters. And ours is 150 in the low density. So there's already a discrepancy there. Ours is a little tighter. So we've decided to set that tighter, but quite frankly, it's my intention to change that to meet these recommendations when we do our next bylaw update. So they are recommendations. Ultimately, what they are there for. So the NFPA, National Fire Protection Agency, spacing is approximately double of what the fire underwriters survey recommends. In general, that is because hydrants don't always work. Sometimes they're hit by cars, sometimes they're not maintained properly, sometimes cars are parked in front of them. We have a redundancy in our service levels in order to account for something that may or may not be working when the time comes. So I do say that in Salmon Arm we have excellent maintenance on our hydrants, so we can in general count on them to be working. They do get buried in snow sometimes, things happen. So what you're seeing with the fire underwriters survey is that they are half of what the NFPA accounts for, and that is so that there is a redundant hydrant for every one that you absolutely require. And that's where the recommendations come from.
Okay, I understand. I'm only guessing, but it seems to me likely that the standard of 90 meters has been a standard that's come into place since the city put all those fire hydrants out there. Because surely we would have put them 90 meters apart if the standard would have been 90 meters when the hydrants were put in. Do we know that?
Through your worship, no, 90 meters has definitely been predated ours, but what you will often see is that the city, when spending capital dollars, will spend it as frugally as possible. So if we were to build to the full standard, it would be quite expensive and things would not get done. So oftentimes we will choose to do it to a standard that will work, but will not necessarily be the highest standard, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, and that's good information as well. If councillors don't have other questions, I just have a couple of others. Councillor Canada, did you have a question?
Not a question, just a comment.
Comment? Can I go ahead? Just, it's regarding the letter from Dynaflex, which is appendix number 3. And I know in the picture that the Director of Development Services showed us, maybe can we just go to that picture because the letter refers to it. Great, thank you. It's about the yellow fire hydrant that's in the middle of the Dynaflex property. What the letter says about that hydrant, now I understand it's a private hydrant and it's on private lands, but it's hooked into a city water line from a private line. It is checked regularly and has to, you know, it's in the interest of the company, of course, but has to pass the test to make sure it's working properly. Is that fire hydrant considered at all by the city when we look at the bylaw and that new building that's happening?
Your worship, the on-site fire hydrant is a BC building code requirement, which is separate to the servicing bylaw. The servicing bylaw is for off-site and the fire hydrant is on-site.
Okay. If we took one of those little circles and included that yellow fire hydrant that's on site, would it fit the bylaw?
I don't know. But that, you know, without the fire chief here, that's probably the reason why, and I don't want to speculate, but that's probably the reason why the fire chief may not have concerns on this property.
I'll save that question then until the council meeting. It's fair enough. Okay, I'll go to Councillor Cannon's comments.
So as it sits right now, until I'm going to support this variance, and I look forward to next Monday when the fire chief is here and we can ask a few more questions. But I look at the property that Mr. Bowman has his business on and how long he's been there, and it's a small business with one employee. I mean, we talk about the city being frugal when they put in their fire hydrants to save capital. I think it's sufficient, the hydrants that are there in my mind, what I look at and see right now, and to get a small business to have to ante up more money to put in another fire hydrant, which it's just over a 2,000 square foot addition to his business. I'm fine with the fire chief's letter in this package saying that he's fine with the flows and where the fire hydrants are existing right now. So I support the variance at this time.
Thank you, Councillor Cannon. Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I'll certainly vote to move this forward to council. I must say in general, I'm supporting the staff rationale on this approach right now, recognizing the costs and the redundancy issues that are there. And I look forward to, again, the fire chief speaking on this. My thinking at this stage right now is there's internal versus external access. And what's foremost in my mind are the issues of fire smarting on locations that are close to Crown land and potential wildfire stuff. And for me, and again, I'll think more about this and certainly listen to the fire chief and the presentations coming in again. But the industrial park has its own Crown land interface issues. And I think that we are better, and we use the word redundancy not only in the flow of the external hydrants, but being prepared for potential risk coming that way. In a non-forestry, non-firefighting sense, I think the industrial park on the whole is at risk for Crown land fire potential. And I think that my thinking right now is that we need to stay up to the recommended engineering standards, although I don't think those standards have been applied because of those fire smarting Crown interface things. So that's where I am right now. Certainly move it forward, but I'll be looking very closely at those issues when it comes to council.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Just have one more question before I call a motion. Question on the motion. The Appendix 3 is Mr. Bowman's letter to us, and I'm just curious about 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th paragraph down, he refers to a similar building being constructed across the street in July 2018 for Talius. I just want to check the accuracy of that and whether it triggered the off-site requirements or not. Do we have that information? If we don't, it could wait till the council meeting.
There is another building permit application in for Talius, and they are applying for a fire hydrant variance as well, and that will be coming to council.
Okay, maybe I'll just ask Mr. Bowman, is that the piece that you're referring to? I thought somehow it was referring to something else.
They had a coverall building collapse in 2017, 18, the winter, and they replaced it the following summer by Spanmaster, the same company that put in my building. And yeah, they basically told me what I was going to have to do to put that building in, and it was totally different from Talus to me with the fire hydrant requirement apparently.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll tell you what, we'll look into that we'll have that information for the council meeting, because it might be important information. All right, any other comments from council? I too will vote to move this forward to the council meeting. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so we'll address this on August the 12th. That'll be 7 o'clock in the evening, is that correct? Yeah. Okay, so you're more than welcome to be here. All right, let's move ahead then to 5.2, development variance application number VP 500, Cowan and Arsenal, 4340 20th Street Northeast, retaining wall and fence. We have a proposed motion. We have a mover and seconder to that. Councillor Eliason, Councillor Flynn, thank you. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the variance application.
Your Worship, this is a variance application regarding a retaining wall on a property at 4340 20th Street Northeast, owned by Mr. and Mrs. Cowan. The agent is Gary Arsenault from Green Emerald Construction. The subdivision is known as Green Emerald, and the property is shown on this ortho photo. This photo, as you know, was taken 3 years ago. The subdivision is a lot more built out than what is shown on the photo now. The wall in question is sited along the western property line of the property. And if you drive up 20th Street and look up the panhandle, you'll see a bunch of large boulders. And there's some photos in the staff report showing the wall. The bylaw requires a maximum height of 2 meters for a retaining wall. And there's 2 walls here, and each wall is 2.4 meters in height. It would be considered one wall if each wall was sited closer together, or sorry, further apart. No, hang on. It is considered one wall even though there's two walls, and that's because the proximity of the walls are closer together. If they're sited further apart, then they would be separate. But even still, each wall is 2.4 meters in height, so each wall would still need a variance for height. The property most impacted by this variance would be this one here, 4820 20th Street Northeast, which is vacant at the moment. And that property is owned by Mr. Arsenault. So as far as impacts go, staff don't see any impacts on this property. I don't like to speak for neighboring properties when it comes to neighborhood impact. I leave that up to the neighbors to make their claim on that, and they all have been notified of this variance hearing. Mr. Arsenault was invited to the meeting this morning. I don't see him here. And the staff report goes into detail about retaining wall heights, where the wall is sited, and the rationale for the variance.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up to council. Mr. Arsenault's not in the audience today, so councillors, do you have any questions around this variance? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move to information items. Item 6.1, solar feasibility study. And in your package, you have a copy of the report from Riverside Energy Limited. We do have a proposed motion as well, don't we? That I think is going to come on the screen here in a minute. Thank you. Okay. I'll just have, maybe I'll have the administrative officer just read it, and then Councillor Lyson has moved the motion. Would you read the motion for us, proposed motion?
Sure, that council receive the solar PV feasibility study prepared by Riverside Energy Limited, and that council directs staff to proceed with a request for quotations or similar process to install a 10.2 kilowatt demonstration rooftop solar PV system as described in the review at the Salmon Arm Arts Centre to be funded from the Climate Action Reserve to a maximum of $30,000.
Thank you. Councillor Lyson moves that. Councillor Lavery second. And that motion, if regardless of what this committee determines, would come up at the August 12th council meeting. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. I will open up it up then to the Director of Development Services to describe for us the report. Either that or Director of Engineering and Public Works, I'm not sure.
Your worship, I'll just say a few words about it.
Okay, thank you.
Council directed staff to conduct this feasibility study in, I think, January maybe of this year. So we've done that. It looks at the feasibility of installing a solar PV system at 3 locations, the Fire Hall, the Art Gallery, and City Hall. And the report talks about the pros and cons of each of those and details what the potential costs may be. This concept is not coming from staff. It was at the direction of council.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll open up to Councillor Eliason.
Thanks. What would the timeline on something like this be for the actual project to take place and construction to happen?
Chief Administrative Officer?
It's hard to say, Your Worship, but I would guess it would be in the spring of next year when it actually happened.
Okay. It is just a comment or a question, and thanks for bringing this forward, but it seems like if we're going to spend $30,000 out of this year's climate action budget, would it be possible to go full net zero on it because it's easier to do now than it is in the future. And if you look at the full cost, instead of 30,000, it'd be 62 for the estimated installation. And if we were able to budget that from maybe from our CAREP grant that we receive in the 2020 budget added to this, then we would achieve something that we could even be more proud of and come from another budget item. And the economies of scale might make sense to do at that time. So if we're looking at a 30,000 this year, if in our budgeting process coming up, we can allocate another 30,000 or 32,000, we might be able to achieve full net zero on that building, which is, I think, the ultimate goal.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Eliason. If you want to hold on to that thought, we'll just see what other councillors are thinking. Councillor Lavery.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship, and I'm glad this is coming forward. Just to reiterate, this is the intent was a demo project to have the data, not only have the sort of solar photovoltaic panels up, but the data immediately accessible to people. I think the study is great. It's really in depth, the full report, and it gives us also good grounding for future involvement as well. To start off with, Your Worship, through you, maybe a confirmation from our Chief Financial Officer. In anticipation of this coming forward in late June, I want to get an update of how much we have in the Climate Action Fund. So question number one is, have we actually received our 2018 carbon tax rebate yet? I know we've put it into the budget, but have we actually received it yet?
Chief Financial Officer.
Your Worship, I would have to confirm that. Typically, I believe we receive it in June or July. So I will have to confirm whether it was actually received.
So, thank you. And so the numbers I have, and again, maybe confirmation from the Chief Financial Officer, assuming that we may or may not have actually received it, but we have budgeted in as an income for that. We had $195,000 in that reserve. That includes the potential of $54,000 coming from the carbon tax rebate, $5,000 solar feasibility study that paid for this study, and $45,000 in earmarked funds to come out of there for the purchase of hybrid vehicles. So we have the money there. I do think, so I guess the question is, are those numbers correct? 195,000 less those earmarks.
Chief Financial Officer.
Yes, Your Worship. The estimated closing balance is $148,000.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And so we do have that amount. And again, I in terms of banging the drum continually, I think it's an interesting point that Councillor Eliason has brought up. Another one of his points. I'll think about that. I'm leaning right now, though, to us going with the original intent, which is a demonstration up to $30,000. I do think that there will be other demands on that Climate Action Fund going forward. And the ultimate build out to get to net zero, I think, is laudable. I'll certainly consider that as we go forward here. But it involves other sorts of configurations around the Arts Center, including parking stalls and things like that too. So I just have to think about that a bit more. But I urge us to support this initiative. And I'd also note staff is more than not suggested, but indicated that it needs to go to the to get heritage approval to adjust things on a heritage site. So I think that would be conditional on that approval as well as the inspection of the roof to finally to officially confirm that it will hold the proposed installation. We just at this stage, it's been a recommendation and a budgeted amount to go and check and confirm it. So there are a few ifs and ands here before the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, but I will support this motion.
Thank you. So knowing Councillor Eliason's thought, and perhaps at the council meeting, maybe there may be an amendment coming forward. It gives us all a week to think about that. So thank you for planting that seed. Is there other comments from councillors? Okay, my own comments. The heritage piece. Has the Heritage Commission looked at this up to this time?
No.
Not yet, so that would be referred to them. And is there, I know parts of that building are part of the provincial heritage register. Does it need to go through them as well?
Yes.
Okay, it does. All right, so those are important things that should we pass a motion on August the 12th that would get started. I'm very much in favor of the proposed motion, And I'd like to thank Councillor Lavery for his work on keeping this moving forward. I think the location is excellent, and I think that's what we're after, is to try to highlight solar energy in a public place, on a public building, where it's going to be very visible, with the idea of, yes, offsetting the cost to operate that building, but more importantly, to highlight to the public the possibility that they may want to think about using solar energy on their own houses. And we do see some houses around Salmon Arm now that have solar energy panels. And we also know that there's the new builds, lots of them are preparing so that owners may wish to do it. So I'm in favor of moving this forward to the council meeting, and we'll support it at that time. Seeing no other comments, I will call the question. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. We will go to the last item, body gripping animal traps. So there's a report from staff information. I'll maybe refer to staff if they would like to add to the written report. Is that the Director of Development Services? Okay, thank you.
Your Worship, back in May, Council, on the correspondence, on a regular council meeting agenda on May 22nd, there was a large petition requesting that the City of Salmon Arm implement a bylaw to regulate body gripping animal traps. And it was, I guess, in response to an unfortunate incident where a dog was killed in a trap on private property. And there was reference to one similar municipal bylaw in the town of Gibsons. Staff was asked to look into it and prepare a report. So the report is in front of you today. We looked at the Gibsons bylaw that was adopted in 2011. We spoke with bylaw enforcement staff in Gibsons. That bylaw has rarely been used. I think it's been used once since it was adopted. We spoke to a local conservation officer, I believe based out of Vernon. So when I say local, within 100 kilometers of Salmon Arm. We attached the information about the provincial regulations under the Wildlife Act pertaining to traps. And there's some good information in your agenda on page 41, which talks about the provincial regulations relating to traps. And this is just a summary of the regulations, but it's a good summary. And it talks about things like the fact that the regulations are continually updated to address different circumstances and scenarios. And as council knows, when provincial regulations change, it's difficult to keep up with those provincial regulations with our bylaws. That's one of the challenges of having a bylaw trying to, I guess, be concurrent with a provincial regulation. Another interesting statement in the information package on page 43, under other restrictions and information, it says, you are reminded that under sections 247 and 466 of the Criminal Code of Canada, it is an offense for anyone to willfully cause or permit to be caused unnecessary pain, suffering, or injury to an animal. So that tells me that not only is there a provincial regulation regarding animal traps, but it's can be a criminal code violation. So again, having a municipal bylaw that tries to regulate something covered by provincial and federal regulations, that can be complicated too. So at the end of the day, if you read the staff report, we don't recommend that we adopt a bylaw.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the report and for adding to it this morning. Councillors, any questions or comments on the report? Okay, seeing none, we'll receive the report for information for the time being. Councillors may wish to raise something in the future. Is there any other business that council might have? Seeing none, we have a motion to adjourn.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, second by Councillor Lavery, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting of August 6, 2019 be adjourned.
All those in favor? Thank you very much.